Yakshimesh, every Englishman must have a hobby. Some like to collect the stamp, some like to make the jam, but the most fun is to kill a little animal with a shotgun or rip him up with a wild dog. This is why I come to the countryside to find out about English hobbies.
Unoffensive Animal is a project that has made a lot of headway in not a lot of time. It's predominantly focused on animal liberation as a whole, but, as will become clear, the group also has plenty of involvement with sabbing specifically. I wanted to find out more about Unoffensive Animal and how it situates Hunt Sabotage within wider circles of animal, ecological and social struggle. Florence was kind and eloquent enough to tell me all about the group's aims and actions.
Have you ever done any fox hunting?
Oh, what a question. Fox hunting, glorious sport, isn't it? Why, when I was Chancellor...
Yes. But would it be a glorious sport if the fox pursued you?
So thanks for speaking to me. Could you tell me a little bit about the prehistory of Unoffensive Animal, how it's founded, and how the people involved came to make that happen?
So we all came from different backgrounds, really. My personal experience was sort of around 15. I started getting involved in local anti-racist groups, just like quite peaceful stuff, really, like leafleting, doing local stalls. That sort of progressed to getting involved in a local anti-fascist group, sort of culminating in me going to Dover, I think, a few years ago, and being shit scared and realising, wow, this stuff actually really does happen. I think mine was quite similar to other people's, really. They'd sort of taken part in class struggle, anti-fascist and other sort of social justice campaigning issues when they got involved in animal stuff. Unoffensive Animal specifically, it was sort of a poor attempt we'd made to consolidate a creative and local group of animal rights activists. We realised we sort of needed more practice in non-hierarchical strategy before attempting to create kind of groups like that. So we used to sort of meet and have dinner at a flat, and there we sort of had ideas talking about a grassroots collective that brings together concepts of animal liberation to the broader social justice issues, kind of struggles at the same time as radicalising the animal liberation community towards a more anarchist, inclusive and much more creative kind of movement. Another thing I think was we felt that the main sort of animal liberation front media was too sporadic, and quite far away from the age of social media. Sort of everything's on Facebook nowadays, so we kind of found our niche. We sort of decided to just go all in and show the animal liberation community how struggles from other fronts, particularly ecological struggles, are fighting the fight. We sort of believe we do have quite a lot to learn from tree-hugging radical hippies. So sort of in between talking about revolution, cooking really good pizza, and developing who we were as a group, that's sort of where Unoffensive Animal was born. At the beginning, people regarded us as like a refreshed ALF, which was kind of wrong and brought us some trouble, actually. About a month after we launched the Facebook page, the first Facebook page has actually ended up getting taken down after a few months. We sort of found we had a unmarked cop van sitting outside the front of the flat, sort of day in, day out for I think about 6 weeks. It's quite bizarre. We can only assume they were terribly interested in our bowel movements or our foods we were eating, because everything we're doing really is online. I guess they eventually realised that because they did eventually fuck off. So all in all, I'd say that was quite a strong start for us as a collective.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And how long has the group been consolidated as a thing?
As a thing, say just over a year. We sort of had our first year anniversary as a collective. Sort of a couple of months ago. I can't remember the specific date. It's sort of from the sort of failed group to Unoffensive Animal, the lines kind of got blurred. I think it is just about over a year and a couple of months.
Okay, so it's not that long at all, really. So it's been
No, not that long. It's kind of like a little baby, really.
yeah, it's been a hell of a year.
Yeah, it really has been a hell of a year.
Yeah. Could you talk a bit about the goals and the kinds of things that Unoffensive Animal gets up to or does? I mean, you said just now that it's kind of primarily online. Is that right?
So although we do sort of do a lot of stuff online, that's not all that we do. We take part in actions sort of locally and internationally. These can sort of include, but aren't limited to, doing slaughterhouse blockades, local sab groups, European sab groups. Me personally, I'm involved with my local Food Not Bombs, sort of Handbook of Forest as well, which I know we're going to be talking about later. Sort of as well as these actions and the online stuff, we try to keep up with news elsewhere and bring a taste of what's happening in the animal liberation movement around the world, but also publishing events and actions on other social and environmental issues. So it's not just animal stuff. As well as this, we sort of provide support to prisoners, either sort of through letter writing ourselves or encouraging others to write letters, or if we do have a little bit of cash left over, as we aren't really about making money, we do sort of send that as well. More recently, we've started doing workshops. So we will travel around giving workshops with the aim of empowering activists and sort of reminding activists of the direct action history of the animal liberation movement. As to our goal, it's quite simple. Total downfall of capitalism, hierarchies, and human supremacy. No, in all seriousness, we just want to show activists that another world is possible, that there is more to it than the mainstream activist ways that sort of seem to be taking over at the moment. Veganism doesn't automatically mean cruelty-free. Food sovereignty is key to overcoming the oppressions humans face, but also to completely obliterate animal suffering.
Yeah. There's nothing funny about bringing an end to capitalism and this fucked up civilization, I don't think.
Yeah.
Even though it's a glib answer, but it's also a very good one, I think. So there's a couple of things that I'll come back to a little bit later that you've already said, but just going on from what you have said about the activities and goals of Unoffensive Animal, could you talk about the relationship between you as an individual or you as a group and Hunt Sabotage?
So sort of members of the collective, we've been sabbing for ages, sort of even before Unoffensive Animal. I think I remember about a year and a half ago, I think we were sabbing Southdown and Erridge Hunt whilst planning sort of demo outside our local zoo with the failed group that came before Unoffensive Animal. So it's sort of, we've been sabbing for ages, even before Unoffensive Animal was created. Particularly, we put quite a bit of effort into the badger cull with the aim to get more people involved. We sort of created this offshoot of Unoffensive Animal called the Underground Badger Syndicate. It specifically focuses on the badger cull. In relation to sabbing, our aim really is to inspire more people to get involved. I can feel a bit sad, as it feels like the only reason we aren't winning the fight is because people don't feel empowered enough to sort of actually get out on the fields when they're sort of perfectly able to. So instead, they'll just sort of donate some cash instead, which is amazing. Obviously, we need that financial support to keep going, but it would be great if we could get more people out on the fields, obviously. One thing particularly we wanted to mention was we sort of do see a need to get a bit more creative with our sabbing. This sort of idea was inspired by a report last year. I can't remember specifically where or what time it came from, but hearing of some shooting masterclasses being stopped simply by nicking a Shooting Times magazine, having a little read and using the information inside to well and truly fuck up shooting classes. They managed to sort of make some phone inquiries, eventually got given a meet, sort of during the preliminary health and safety talks, sort of sabs were sneaking around the bushes, and by the time the shoot were ready to go out, they found all the decoys and hides had been taken away by some pesky little pixies. A couple of rape alarms also they'd been put out and been set off. So that sort of meant for them, at the end of the day, they hadn't been able to shoot a thing. I think from the report, it was something like, I think around £1,200 that each person had paid to be there, and there was about 8 of them. So I do imagine they were quite pissed off. And I really would like to sort of see, and I think we would as a collective, not just me as an individual, would like to see sort of more creative actions like that in relation to sabbing.
Yeah, I don't have an amazing grasp of the history of sabbing by any means, but I feel like from what I have read that kind of wider creativity in approaches, greater diversity in approach, was more common, in the so-called golden age of sabbing in like the 80s. And it's a little bit more homogenized now, but I think maybe that's just in part because the sabbing seemed to have died off a little bit for a while, but it's really coming back and going from strength to strength over the last 5 years or so. So who knows where we'll be in another 5 years? We could be exactly that kind of point that you're talking about, which is the kind of creative and imaginative approaches. Yeah. Have you read the speech that was given by Joe Hashman of Hounds Off at the HSA AGM?
No, was that the most recent AGM?
Yeah, the one at...
No.
Yeah. It's on the Hounds Off website, and he talks quite a bit there about the importance of having like a broad front, and that sabbing isn't just being out in the fields up with the hunt all the time, which I think is important. He talks a lot about kind of undercover stuff, which I think obviously is really important. But again, that's just something that what you said had reminded me of. Okay, you've talked a little bit about kind of how you and the people in the group became involved in kind of animal rights and animal liberation stuff. But you also said that many people have been involved for quite a long time with sabbing. Is that something? How did that happen? Was that something that interested? For example, you talked about coming from a kind of anti-fascist and that kind of background. What was it about sabbing that kind of intrigued and attracted you?
Me personally, it was sort of the idea of a group of sort of people all with the same idea, you're all angry about the same thing, quite similar to anti-fascist stuff as well, I think. You're just going out and stopping something that you don't agree with. You're not just sitting and moaning and not really doing anything. Sabbing, you're actually getting out there. That was for me what I found sort of quite attractive about it. I don't know if attractive is the right word, but what attracted me to sabbing, maybe is a better way to put it. It's an opportunity to not just sit and moan, but to get angry and do something.
Yeah. And have you found that the reality of that met your expectations?
Yes and no. I think it's varied from group to group that we've been with. We've been with them, obviously not with every group, but in the UK and in Europe, we've been with a few groups, and we find they're all sort of structured a little bit differently. So I think it varies really group to group. Yeah.
Are you able to talk a little bit more about the different structures within different groups? Perhaps a more kind of guided question, if that would be helpful, is what do you find more enjoyable in groups or group structures?
I sort of enjoy the ones, this is again for me personally, I don't speak for the whole collective, so ones that are more non-hierarchical. I find for me they work better. I feel like I learn more. I'm not saying I'm the most experienced sab at all, I'm probably quite pants. I find that I learn more. I'm more confident in asking questions. I find that they work more effectively sort of actually out on the field as well, not just like in the landy, sort of passing on information, learning from people, actually out on the field. Yeah, I think that's just my opinion though. I'm not sure how the other people in the collective would answer that question.
Yeah, but that would imply that you have found groups that don't necessarily operate in that kind of non-hierarchical manner. Is that correct?
Yeah, it does feel like some groups do have a lack of non-hierarchical organising. Don't really know if this is a reflection on how society has a sort of institutionalised, or if there is too much apathy in certain groups to develop something that's non-hierarchical. Yeah, some it just feels like there are sort of natural leaders that sort of command the group, which I do believe is needed. You do need people that are quite confident.
And saboteurs. These are called sabs in England. They're demonstrating against fox hunting. The majority of them are young people. Some are paid to demonstrate against fox hunting and to disrupt hunting.
Yeah, so obviously the Unoffensive Animal is a group that's not just about sabbing. It's, as you have said, it's kind of involved with not only wider animal liberation struggles, but also ecological struggles, and then wider other kind of social and class struggles. What do you think is the role of sabbing, firstly within kind of veganism and animal liberation or animal rights? Why do you think that sabbing is an important part of that?
Sort of historically speaking, sabbing was like the precursor to the Band of Mercy, and sabbing allowed people to think outside of the box, if you will, and sort of materialise direct action, and we think it still does. I mentioned already how I felt it empowering to take action against something you feel so strongly about, surrounded by other like-minded people, and how I felt that sabbing, you're not just moaning about something on Facebook, about something that's really pissed you off, but you're actually getting up and doing something. Sort of another thing, a more practical side of it is you sort of learn transferable skills from sabbing, things like such as map reading, radios, GPS systems, all those sort of useful skills. I don't know if this is me speaking as like a sort of younger generation activist. I'm going to count myself as that anyway. I sort of wouldn't know these skills really if it wasn't for sabbing, and they are quite useful and transferable.
Okay. And what do you think is the role of, if any, you may not have an answer for this, but the role of sabbing within kind of other ecological and social struggles?
I don't think I have a particular answer for this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
I know there are elements, sort of people talk about elements of class war, but then sort of when I've had conversations about that, it's not really, I get the impression, obviously it's not really why we're there to have a class war. Primarily we're there to save the hunted animal. That's, yeah.
Yeah, I think that element of class is interesting because it's, when you're actually out in the field, the only people who ever bring up class are the hunt themselves.
Oh yeah, of course, always.
But having said that, I think it's kind of, I don't know if it's possible to divorce the class content from the whole process of sabbing, because although not everyone involved in hunting is rich or aristocratic, it certainly has the kind of the social weight or the social history of being a kind of a sport or a pastime for the upper classes, and that the people who aren't upper class involved with it are the kind of the working class who believe in in class collaboration rather than class conflict, and that in itself is, you know, that's kind of quite an important aspect, but maybe that's not a discussion to be had at the moment.
To add to that, all you need to really look at is today coming out about Princess Diana's sister or something endorsing or vouching for members of the Belvoir hunt?
The beaver hunt, yeah. That's, yeah.
Yeah, that hunt for bloody hell breaking someone's neck.
I know, it's hilarious. And yeah, it's a good reminder that, like, there's still the last vestiges of feudalism remaining, and it kind of exists in the hunting community, seemingly. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Humbucker Forest, which, the kind of the first question about that is, I remember seeing on Instagram a little while back, maybe in February, I'm not sure, but there was a post by Unoffensive Animal about the fact that some shooters had turned up in the forest, and there was seemingly a spontaneous SAB response to that. Are you able to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. With issues or incidents relating to the Humbucker Forest, I am not the human in the collective that lives in the Humbucker Forest. There are a few of us, and one in particular does sort of choose to live in the Humbucker Forest. So this is me telling their story, if you will. This isn't my own personal experience. This is me reading the experience of someone else. So they've sort of written a little story for me to read, which I will. So we were sitting in front of one of the biggest tree houses in the forest, planning and plotting for the Liberate or Die event, which was a skill sharing event we hosted in the Humbucker Forest as an offensive animal. Mostly we were talking about toilets and who was going to build them. We had no idea how many people would come, and we did a good job building 5, as over 100 activists actually turned up for the event. Someone climbed up to make some food and casually dropped the bomb that someone had mentioned about hunters being not too far from the forest. What happened after that was described by comrades as a ping pong ball hitting every wall possible. In 20 seconds, I'd put my clothes on, boots on, I was ballied up and going down from the tree house. You can only imagine that the folks left behind took very little more to follow suit. We ran through the forest and alerted others to what was going on. Some joined, some were too shocked about how quickly we were moving, and some probably didn't understand a thing about what was going on. 3 kilometers later, we found a group of folks with their dogs and a couple of guns. I think they were training scent and getting the dogs used to the sound of shooting more than actually hunting. But still, they weren't impressed seeing a group of 15 ballied up weirdos running towards them. They called the cops. Cops arrived with 5 vans in total and split. The commander told the hunt to pack up and leave whilst we were surrounded by the filth. Some of the Hambies are sort of people that live in the Humbucker Forest, were doing acro yoga and circus shit with the cops all around us. I decided to fuck off. Hunters had been told to move, so there was nothing else for me to do. Apparently that was a bad move. One of the filth reached to his belt and decided to hold me at gunpoint. The police always are quite delightful in Humbucker Forest. After a bit of shouting and having to delete video files, the commander allowed us to leave. So to sort of summarise, they said it was quite an intense SAB for such a small hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds it.
Yeah, from what I've heard, sort of German police tactics are rather full on in comparison, say, to the UK.
Yeah, well, I remember the videos coming out of the Welcome to Hell stuff last year, and yeah, the police response there seemed pretty intense. I can't imagine it would be quite the same in the UK. Thankfully, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So just to go back to the Humbucker Forest questions. Yeah, are you able to talk a bit more about your time and thoughts on the Humbucker Forest occupation? And also, is animal liberation discourse or praxis quite common there?
So again, this is me talking on behalf of somebody from the Handbook Forest. So they've said Hanby is a fucking magical place. It's composed of sort of the most interestingly diverse people, and it surely allows for a lot of theory to be discussed. It's also an amazing place to put into praxis all of the theory that's being discussed as well. Working on hierarchy is interesting, but it's also about how people behave to dissent. From lock-ons to arson attacks, there are so many shapes of direct action that people decide to undergo for the sake of the forest and against the annihilation of the environment. The forest is deeply grounded on anti-capitalist concepts, and there are many things sort of that feel completely normal outside that feel super strange to see within the forest. One example being like carrying a mobile phone in your pocket. The impression I get is that that just doesn't happen. And also another one that made me laugh when they came back from the forest for the first time, walking in the street, brushing your teeth is perfectly acceptable in the Handbook Forest. Yeah, I found that quite odd, but apparently it's normal.
less socially acceptable in the streets of the UK, I guess.
Yeah, I found it quite odd. Anyway, although animal liberation is somewhat present, it's important to understand that there are many groups of people in the forest. Some of those may have an animal liberation discourse, but then will eat animal products from the dumpster. Some will eat vegan food, but not really mind if their boots are from the free shop and have leather on them. Or some will even take a more radical sort of abolitionist perspective of no animal products, nothing whatsoever. I think it's really healthy because it helps us analyse how much of the vegan perspective really is rooted in capitalism and sort of what is classist veganism. We do enjoy forcing the conversation about animal liberation, although sometimes it can get very heated, as you can probably imagine. I feel as though I get more annoyed at non-vegan anarchists than non-anarchist vegans for some reason.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have anything to say on whether the disruption or the sabbing of hunters is a common thing at the Humbucker Forest, or whether the situation you previously described was just a one-off.
So from what I can sort of gather is sort of hunting in and around the forest isn't really something that happens very often. The occupation's been going for around 6 years, and all of the shooting towers were sort of destroyed at the beginning of that. Obviously, hunters aren't welcome there at all. Last winter, after the risk of eviction was lifted, there was a group of people sort of walking out of the forest, and they actually came across more shooting towers. Some towers broke due to very strong winds, and some burned because of, fire. If I recall rightly, there were around 74 towers destroyed in about 6 weeks. And sort of following on from that, the Hunting Association did a press release on national TV and said they were giving up hunting anywhere near the forest. So to sort of answer your question in short, sabotage does happen, just probably a little bit differently to sort of typical day sabbing in the UK.
Okay. Moving on again a little bit. The Unoffensive Animal Facebook, Instagram, etc. Is often publishing or communicating reports of ALF actions and other types of clandestine action. What is the decision, or what is the thinking behind doing this? Because obviously there is, for example, Bite Back exists and has done for a long time. Is this just to kind of complement Bite Back to try and get the word out further?
Yeah, I'd say it sort of is kind of a compliment to Bite Back. Like, we adore Bite Back, and also the Italian and Spanish sort of ALF press officers. We just sort of felt that to a certain extent that there was sort of a gap, as I think I've mentioned this before, sort of about social media. People like things chewed up so they can swallow them quite easily, and we sort of see social media as the jaw, if you will, in that equation. We don't really know about web web traffic of sites like Biteback. On our Facebook page, we're able to sort of see the engagement from sort of outreach activists, non-activist vegans, and also non-vegans, which we do get quite a lot of on the page, getting quite cross about things. We do this to try and reach out further, so people can see things that are happening. They can be shared easily. Like, God, we post things on Facebook, and like within like an hour, they've already got like 100 likes. People are sharing them. It's so easy to sort of get the message across of what's sort of happening in underground animal liberation movements. As well as sort of this, we also publish anarchist, climate justice, underground actions, sort of mainly to point out the similarities, because we feel that they show sort of the struggles are indeed interconnected. We don't sort of consider ourselves to be the same sort of thing as Biteback, if that makes sense. Like, not only do we publish sort of hit reports, we also publish points of view, overground actions, as well as sort of actually taking part in things like blockades ourselves and other sort of sabbing actions. We were sort of concerned, or maybe thinking, oh, like, are we stepping on people's toes by doing this? But we feel like we sort of operate in a slightly different way. So we do see that there is a need for us, or not a need, but like a space for us, maybe is a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you feel that social media is an effective tool to use? Maybe that's a bit of a moot point since you are continuing to use it at the moment. But maybe a better way of putting it would be to say, what do you think is the effectiveness of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and that type of social media in terms of spreading awareness and perhaps encouraging animal liberation activity?
Probably just, like I've said, how easy it is to share things. Although it can obviously go both ways. I've already mentioned how our page got taken down. I think we had a hit report that was posted on the page about I think it was a baby lamb got liberated or something. It ended up being shared in like a countryside capers type Facebook group. And while the hit report itself was getting a lot of support, we ended up also receiving a lot of backlash. The page got reported, I think, over 100 times, and then it just disappeared without warning. It got taken down. So the sort of the speed and ease with which you can share material is what makes it so effective, but it can also sort of pose a problem if it's the wrong places, if that makes sense.
I'm back, Snooty. We're here to liberate that robot fox, and that's what we're gonna do.
What do you think about the relationship between sabbing and ALF or ALF style action? You mentioned earlier, obviously, that the predecessor to the ALF, the Band of Mercy, came out of sabbing historically. You know, there's the historical links there, but today, do you have any thoughts on the relationship between sabbing and ALF actions?
Well, as we've now both mentioned, obviously the historical link between one group and the other. I think also, as I mentioned before, it gives sort of a possibility or an opportunity, both groups, for people to realise that they can do more, to feel empowered. And obviously there is a link between them both being sort of forms of direct action, although it's sort of obviously very important to remember that Hunt Saboteurs and the ALF are completely different groups, and that the aims, message and praxis obviously quite different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine one of the reasons that the police love to clamp down on SABs is because they believe that sabbing is perhaps a gateway drug, but I don't believe that they've actually ever proved that yet. So with with the exception, obviously, of the historical case that we've already mentioned.
Yeah. I think it is that, and also it's, I don't know, maybe it's the masks. I find police tend to don't like people that wear masks.
Yeah, they're all masked up. They're all the same. Yeah. Okay. There was a piece published on Facebook by Unoffensive Animal recently about, I think it was titled "Underground Liberation versus Open Rescue," in which the latter, i.e. open rescue, is criticised for tending towards trying to increase personal popularity as opposed to actually having a kind of a practical effect. Well, my initial question was to kind of move on to Save Movement, but perhaps just before we go to that, I was wondering if you wanted to add anything about that article itself, and perhaps why you were inspired or motivated to write it, or the group was motivated to write it.
We sort of feel or felt before writing that post that there is an increase perhaps in sort of popularity, sort of seeking popularity as an activist or a vegan, and that in doing open rescues, obviously you don't hide your identity. You openly admit what you're doing. For example, like quite a recent thing and an issue that this particular activist has actually been in court for today is Wesley Omar sort of filming himself openly rescuing that pig. And sometimes that's not to say this is what it's not to say that is what Wesley was doing in particular, but it has the potential to sort of be used as like either a popularity boost or like a stroke of the ego, because you do tend to get like a lot of reactions for open rescues because they're sort of not viewed to be as aggressive maybe as like underground liberations, if that makes sense. I did have a point to add, but it's just gone completely. But yeah, it's not, maybe it's not, we're not criticising sort of open rescue at all. It's just our main focus really is that we should analyse the motive behind the action. That's sort of what I'm trying to say here. And like open rescue can be very powerful. For example, like using the example of Wesley Omar again, through filming himself rescuing that pig, he sort of inspired a lot of people to get active. So in that way, like it was very powerful. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you can see maybe other activists sort of taking it as a way of like attaining or achieving private gain in sort of the sense of popularity, if that makes sense. Perhaps I feel like I'm not making sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think you're right, and I think that's interesting. I was listening to a relatively recent episode of AR Zone. I don't know if you know the AR Zone podcast.
Don't know.
Okay, well, it's a long-running animal rights podcast, and there's a recent episode with Carol J. Adams where they talk quite extensively about Direct Action Everywhere, DXE, and Anonymous for the Voiceless, and talk about Carol Adams is she made a blog post about DXE as and Anonymous for the Voiceless as these kind of cult of personality, which even if a lot of the people involved are doing it with the best of intentions, because of the way it's structured, and it really contributes to this idea of people using animal rights or animal liberation as social capital for themselves, and often that these people are white men. You know, it's quite a patriarchal model. And so I think the role of masks in sabbing is quite interesting, because it's something that is relatively recent. If you go back to the 90s, you don't see photos of Sabs masked up at all. But it's much more, it's not ubiquitous today by any means, but it's very common these days. And I think one of the strengths of wearing masks is, apart from the practical side of it, obviously, you are hopefully preventing people from identifying you, so you don't end up with horrible shit through your door or whatever. It also means that you are depersonalizing the action that you're undertaking, and so that there's far less ego involved, at least kind of publicly. You're not trying to cultivate a kind of personal social capital when you're wearing a mask. And I think that's one of the really strong points of masking up whilst sabbing.
I've never thought of masking up that way. It's quite interesting. What you've just said makes a lot of sense. You sort of are depersonalizing yourself, and it just makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I've never thought about it that way. I sort of more thought about it for the practical reasons of covering your face because you don't want fireworks for you.
Yeah. And that leads quite nicely into what was kind of the original question surrounding this, which is something that is quite common in the UK and the Western world at the moment, is the so-called Save movement, which I think is quite, I don't know if it's intentionally ironically named, but to my knowledge, there's not much saving involved. It's mostly just watching. Did you have any thoughts on the Save movements that you wanted to say?
So together we thought about this question, the original question about the Save movement, and we thought they've very sort of cleverly managed to successfully congregate hundreds of activists doing something at one specific point. There are hundreds, I think, of groups around the world now for the Save movement. I believe it started in Canada. So specifically to the UK, you've got people that are willing to travel hours to attend these vigils. But we thought it's really surprising how quickly it's grown. And we kind of hope, sort of optimistically, that it's a stepping stone, if you will, for people to get angrier. We don't really want people to get stuck there. And sort of with us travelling around, we've recently sort of been to events where there have been blockades at slaughterhouses in France, Switzerland, Belgium, Germany, and Sweden, I think. And it will be really interesting to sort of see how those sort of blockade-style actions would develop in the UK. Because obviously the Save movement has got this quite strict code of conduct about sort of peace to the driver, peace to the workers, we're only here to show love to the animals. So perhaps those sort of actions wouldn't be able to happen under the banner of the Save movement. But the numbers that those vigils attract, it has the potential for bigger and more impactful actions. As a possible catalyst for such actions. And you mentioned Anonymous for the Voiceless already, but we said with this answer we wanted to get across to people, it's important to remember that there are many shapes within activism, and that they are all valid, but we shouldn't just get lost and waste our energy on just doing vigils or just doing cubes. They're perfectly valid, and this is not us criticising them in any way, shape or form, but there is more to it than just these events, and we sort of really believe that diversity of tactics is the key to success.
Yeah, it's true. I think what you say about the ability of the Save movement being able to bring large numbers of people together is amazing. I remember going to the first local Save movement vigil to me a while ago now, and it was a Wednesday morning, like 7 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, and there was like 50 people there, and that's like, I was just like, we can't get 50 people out sabbing on a Wednesday morning, you know. It's like, so they're doing something right.
Although we did manage to get 90 on the moors.
Yeah, well, true. But that was from across the whole country. This was just in a backwater of England, so...
On this occasion, the Sabs win the day and the fox runs free.
Well, unfortunately, the antis called them out, and they went to the antis.
And what do you think about that?
Well, obviously, those of us who love hunting, you know, we're very, very upset about it. It spoils our day, which is obviously what they want to do.
Just to, so kind of bring it back to sabbing and anarchy. Do you have any thoughts on sabbing as a form of anarchic praxis? I guess also in keeping in mind what you said earlier, which is that, you know, not necessarily all groups do have a non-hierarchical format to them. What do you see as the connections between the two?
So I'd say the obvious connection is the direct action side of things. I think we've mentioned this before, that about sort of to a certain extent, sabbing scene has quietened down in terms of radicalism. Sort of reading texts, because obviously I'm of the younger generation, if you will. Many of the groups in the 80s and 90s were sort of involved in the squatting scene or sort of the local anti-fascist group. And in contrast to this, you're sort of now getting comments on Facebook pages about how it's a shame that the HSA is being affiliated with violent thugs in the anti-fascist network. And we have touched on this before. We actually wanted to mention this now, so I'll probably reiterate the point. We haven't been involved in every SAB group in Europe, but it feels like we've mentioned before, there is a lack of non-hierarchical organising within local groups. But maybe this isn't every group, and obviously we haven't been to every group, and maybe we just need to visit other groups.
Yeah, okay. And to tie that in with some stuff that you're saying quite near the start about the role of Unoffensive Animal and bringing drawing connections between different struggles. Why do you think that is important as something to do? Like, why are you doing that?
For me, I find the struggles are quite interconnected. They sort of don't stand alone. What's the phrase I'm looking for? That they're not mutually exclusive. Sort of, if you care about one, you're going to be more inclined to care about another, and then you care about them all.
And like, you know, is it fair to say, for example, that like it to me doesn't make sense, for example, if you are against the oppression or the murdering of wildlife, that you would then be for the oppression and murdering of people of different ethnicities, for example.
Well, you'd think that, but there are some interesting comments that you see on SAB groups of people that love wildlife but hate people with a different skin colour than that of their own. Yeah, I find it quite bizarre that people sort of can separate those sort of oppressed groups and care about one but not care about the other, but there you go.
Yeah, that's true, actually. You know, there's definitely there seem to have been, at least for a while, and it's always bubbling in the background, a kind of like far right entryism into veganism and animal rights stuff.
If you've got things like the bloody non-humans first agreement, it's just an absolute shit show. Like, as long as you care about the animals, we won't question your human politics. That it's a gateway for all sorts of scum coming into the movement. Like, it's bizarre.
Yeah, that's true, and I guess that's the importance of having an anarchic background to hopefully ensure that doesn't become part. That's kept out of sabbing and out of animal rights and out of animal liberation.
100%, and that's sort of the concept that we had. Is we saw a gap of sort of more radical anarchist perspectives in animal rights, and we also saw sort of, like you say, it's sort of bubbling under the surface, perhaps like a far right entry into animal rights, and we sort of decided to fill the gap and stop that sort of bubbling, if you will, actually sort of occurring into then overspill into the movement of sort of scummy people.
Okay, just a couple of last questions. This might, hopefully, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but something I'm quite interested in, and we've kind of covered it a little bit to some extent, but not directly, which is, do you have any thoughts on sabbing as something that's more than just a single issue campaign? As you know, is sabbing more than just about stopping hounds from killing foxes or hares or stags on a Saturday? And if so, how do you think it expands beyond just being that single issue?
I don't think it is single issue, but then how do I sort of define with words what I think it is? Like, we've sort of touched upon the fact that not everybody involved in hunting sort of is of the stereotypical upper-class, snobby kind of redcoat yayas, if you will. You do get sort of the working class, perhaps more sort of on the terrier men side of things. But for me, personally, I sort of see it as like a big fuck you to the stereotypical sort of snobbery kind of types that you do get. But then, it's an interesting question. It's not something I've really thought about specifically, but just off the top of my head, I do think it's an active defiance against the upper classes. But then again, that's quite class war, isn't it?
Well,
again, something not really a conversation to have right now.
Maybe, yeah. I think that's definitely a conversation to have at some point.
And maybe a conversation worth having, but perhaps not now.
No, yeah, fair enough. I also think like something about sabbing is that, you know, from a personal perspective, because although the externality of direct action is really important, equally important is the impact that it has on us, or you know, myself as an individual. And I think sabbing, because of the relative ease of access to something like sabbing, it's really good at something really basic, just like building confidence. You know, the number of people that number of people that I've sabbed with, or friends who are sabbs, who have said the same thing, that, you know, between them beginning to go out and then maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, and how they feel in terms of self-confidence is really it's really different. You know, their self-confidence has really grown, and I think that's like a really important aspect of being a sab, really, if you stick at it, for sure.
Yeah, I sort of never thought about that, but that does make sense. Sort of, had I thought about, or had we thought about starting Unoffensive Animal like before, or had I even not become a sab, I think I'd probably think I was a bit mad. But like you say, your confidence does grow. I've never sort of really thought about this. It's quite interesting. Yeah, your confidence does grow, and you do find yourself able to sort of take on new challenges, if you will.
Yeah, I've given a couple of talks and speeches at local events, unrelated to animal stuff, but I know that, you know, I wouldn't. I'm quite comfortable doing them now, but don't think I would have been 5 years ago, as you know, when I first started sabbing, really. And I think that part of that is down to my life experience in general, but I think a large part of that is just the confidence that you get in realizing that, you know, when you go out in a field and perhaps you have this image as, even if you don't have any respect or care for the police, they still hold this quite threatening kind of systemic position. But actually, when you're out there and you realise that they're just a bunch of idiots in uniform, then they don't really have that much power, and they become far less threatening. And that's kind of something you only get exposed to when you're taking quite confrontational direct action, such as sabbing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have anything further to ask. I don't know if you have anything else that you would like to say.
Yeah, we had quite a bit of fun with this question. We had quite a bit that we'd like to add. Maybe not relevant to sabbing, but relevant to Unoffensive Animal as a collective. So we'd like to say, we'd like to encourage you to write to prisoners, learn about permaculture, and never, ever, ever eat celery.
I can agree with that.
Yeah. Seriously, fuck celery. Who even? Also, with the growth in veganism and vegan outreach, remember that teaching is also taking direct action. So if you do hold knowledge from the past, then pass it on. We sort of want to encourage and create a community where old activists and new activists are sharing fronts and not just sort of fighting in different directions, saying, oh, in the good old days we had this, and the younger activists sort of going, well, this is how we do it now. Yeah, we want to see sort of that community of skill sharing and knowledge sharing. Mass single business campaigns need to happen again. What's the next one? Fuck Nazis, we've got written down. Use they pronouns with everybody until you feel comfortable to ask what pronouns someone uses. That's quite important. If you can afford it, consider joining our Patreon so we can carry on doing the shit that we've been doing as our laptop is fucked. Come to the Hambacker Forest, the eviction in October, and one last thing to round it off is solidarity to the Kurdish struggle and Biji Rojava.
Definitely. And for anyone that's listening but perhaps hasn't listened to it already, the first episode of Scum Removal was with Charlie the Fox, who had been out with the YPG. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for speaking to me. And maybe I will see you, or at least pass by you, out on the moors.
See my eyes, perhaps.
Exactly.
don't make any demands of the rich. We just want to get rid of the bastards, right?